When death row inmate Marcus Reynolds asked to see his dog one last time before execution, nobody expected this faithful German Shepherd would unravel a deadly conspiracy that reached the highest levels of power. What begins as a heartbreaking final goodbye transforms into an incredible race against time, as Shadow, a loyal companion with aging fur and piercing blue eyes, becomes the unlikely key to proving a man's innocence. As the execution clock ticks down, a detective haunted by his own brother's wrongful death, a woman who sacrificed everything for justice, and a dog who never forgot his master converge in a powerful story of loyalty that transcends prison walls. This true story of unwavering faith will show you how sometimes, in our darkest moments, salvation comes from the most unexpected places. You'll witness how one man's connection with his dog exposed corruption that an entire justice system couldn't see. If you believe everyone deserves a second chance and that love can overcome impossible odds, hit that subscribe button and join our community of heartfelt storytellers. Your support helps us share more incredible tales of hope and redemption that might otherwise never be told. Gray light filtered through the narrow windows of Pinewood Correctional Facility, as though even the Montana sun was hesitant to witness the grim events about to unfold within its walls. In precisely 3 hours, Mark Reynolds would become the state's first execution in nearly a decade, unless a miracle intervened. Mark lay shackled to a steel bed in the secure wing, his once military physique now diminished by 5 years of confinement. The rhythmic footsteps of guards echoed against the concrete walls, a sound that had become as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. But today, those footsteps carried a different weight, the finality of his last dawn. "I'd like to see Shadow before I die," Mark repeated to the guard stationed outside his cell, his voice hoarse from disuse. Just once more. Shadow was his German Shepherd, a loyal companion he had rescued from an abusive home 3 years before his arrest. The memory of the dog's transformation from a frightened, scarred animal to a trusting friend brought a lump to Mark's throat. They had saved each other once. Now, separated by steel and circumstance, Mark's only wish was to feel that connection one final time. Warden Cassidy appeared, her posture rigid but her eyes betraying a flicker of humanity. "Reynolds, you know animal visits aren't standard protocol for death row inmates." "Please," Mark said, meeting her gaze directly. "Shadow is with Rebecca Foster, my former fiancée. If there's any mercy left in this place—" "The woman who's been campaigning for your release for 5 years?" Cassidy interrupted, a note of recognition in her voice. Mark nodded, too exhausted to elaborate. Rebecca had sacrificed everything, her promising legal career, their shared dreams, even her own health, fighting a system that had already decided his fate. All because she believed what Mark had shouted from the beginning: he never murdered Victor Harmond. A fleeting memory surfaced, Shadow as a puppy, trembling in the corner of a filthy garage where Mark had found him during a security consultation job. The dog's ribs had protruded sharply against matted fur, yet his ice-blue eyes held no malice, only fear and a desperate hope. Mark had extended his hand, waiting patiently until Shadow inched forward to sniff his fingers. "I'll consider it," Warden Cassidy finally said, interrupting Mark's reverie. "But don't get your hopes up." As she walked away, Mark heard the murmurs of conversation outside. "Another protest forming," one guard remarked to another. "Half of them think he's guilty of sin. The other half want the death penalty abolished entirely." Mark closed his eyes, shutting out the world. Their opinions meant nothing now. In 3 hours, the needle would deliver its cold verdict, regardless of truth or justice. He eased himself off the bunk, feeling the chains clink around his ankles. With effort, he reached the small window, a high rectangular slit, and glimpsed a watery band of light spreading across the horizon. The sight painfully reminded him of early mornings spent with Shadow in Pinewood Park, the German Shepherd running circles around him, tail wagging wildly with pure joy. For a moment, Mark could almost feel the leather leash in his hand, hear Shadow's excited bark, smell the dew-damp grass beneath their feet. "Reynolds." A guard's voice shattered the illusion. "Time to move to the final holding cell. Warden wants you prepped." Mark turned, swallowing hard. "Any word about my request? About Shadow?" The guard avoided his gaze. "All I know is they're checking. Don't hold your breath." With practiced resignation, Mark offered his wrist for the cuffs. One last journey through these halls. One final chance to remember what freedom felt like, if only in his mind. As the prison gates closed behind Mark, sealing his fate with cold finality, 20 miles away, Rebecca Foster's phone rang with a call that would change everything. "Miss Foster," Warden Cassidy from Pinewood Correctional. The official voice carried through the speaker. "I'm calling about Marcus Reynolds' request." Rebecca's hand trembled so violently, she nearly dropped the phone. She'd been awake all night, pacing the floor of her modest apartment, unable to sleep knowing that sunrise would bring Mark's execution. Shadow, sensing her distress, had stayed close, occasionally whining and pressing his aging body against her legs. "Is there any change?" Rebecca's voice cracked with desperate hope. "Has the governor?" "No," Warden Cassidy interrupted firmly. "The execution will proceed as scheduled, but Mr. Reynolds has requested to see his dog, Shadow, one last time. He says the animal is in your care." Rebecca sank into a kitchen chair, tears welling in her eyes. 5 years ago, she'd been a rising star at Montana's most prestigious law firm. Now she lived in a cramped one-bedroom apartment, its walls papered with case files and appeal saw rejected. She'd sacrificed everything trying to prove Mark's innocence, even selling her engagement ring to fund a private investigator. "I'll bring him," she whispered, glancing at Shadow. The German Shepherd's muzzle had grayed during Mark's imprisonment, but his ice-blue eyes remained alert and intelligent. "How much time do we have?" 90 minutes maximum. After that, it won't be possible." After hanging up, Rebecca knelt beside Shadow, burying her face in his thick fur. "We're going to see Mark," she told him, voice breaking. Shadow's ears perked up at Mark's name, and he let out a soft whine that shattered what remained of Rebecca's composure. Outside, dark clouds gathered on the horizon as she guided Shadow into her ancient pickup truck. The engine sputtered reluctantly to life, another casualty of her single-minded devotion to Mark's case. Her bank account was empty, her legal career in ruins, and her parents hadn't spoken to her since she'd abandoned reason to defend that murderer. But as Rebecca glanced at Shadow sitting attentively in the passenger seat, she felt no regret, only the crushing weight of failure. "We tried, didn't we, boy?" she murmured, pulling onto the highway. Shadow whined softly in response, pressing his nose against the window as if he understood the gravity of their journey. Suddenly, fat snowflakes began falling from the darkening sky, unusual for early spring in Montana. Within minutes, visibility deteriorated as the unexpected storm intensified. Rebecca gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles whitening. "No," she whispered fiercely. "Not now. We're not going to be late." She pressed harder on the accelerator, ignoring the treacherous conditions. Shadow grew restless beside her, sensing her anxiety. The wipers struggled against the thickening snow as traffic slowed to a crawl. When her phone rang again, Rebecca answered without taking her eyes off the road. "I'm on my way," she said immediately. "Miss Foster, we're implementing lockdown protocols early due to the weather," the prison official explained. "If you're not here within 40 minutes, the visit won't be possible." Rebecca's throat constricted with panic. "I'll be there," she promised, ending the call. As she navigated a dangerous curve, Shadow suddenly barked sharply, the special, alert bark he'd only ever used with Mark. Rebecca glanced at him in surprise and found the German Shepherd staring ahead with an intensity that sent chills down her spine. For a moment, it seemed Shadow knew exactly what was at stake. Against all logic, his posture radiated pure determination, as if his will alone could part the blinding snow and deliver them to Mark in time. "We're coming," Rebecca whispered, wiping tears from her cheeks with one hand. "Hold on, Mark, we're coming." While Rebecca battled the worsening blizzard, Detective Gabriel Mercer stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie with trembling fingers. The reflection staring back at him belonged to a stranger, a man, haunted by the weight of decisions he could no longer justify. Today was the day Mark Reynolds would die for Victor Harmon's murder. The case that had earned Mercer a promotion. The open and shut investigation that prosecutors had praised as exemplary work. Yet sleep had evaded him for weeks now, his nights plagued by the same recurring nightmare, his younger brother Michael's face superimposed over Mark's as they led him to execution. Mercer's brother had died in prison 3 years ago, wrongfully convicted of armed robbery, exonerated posthumously when the actual perpetrator confessed. Too late for Michael. And now, possibly too late for Mark Reynolds. He reached for the worn case file hidden behind his winter coats, the unofficial copy he'd been reviewing obsessively since doubts first surfaced. The evidence had seemed so convincing. Mark's partial fingerprint on the murder weapon, a suspicious bank deposit coinciding with Harmon's death, witnesses placing him near the luxury penthouse that night. But examining it now, with eyes sharpened by guilt and experience, Mercer saw the inconsistencies. The fingerprint belonged to a knife Mark admitted owning one reported stolen months before the murder. The bank deposit remained untraceable. And the witnesses? All connected Harmon's vast real estate empire. Mercer's phone buzzed with a text from his former partner. Second forensic report confirmed. It was deliberately buried. His stomach lurched. He'd suspected the second report existed, but confirmation made it real evidence of footprints not matching Mark's shoe size and gunpowder residue, inexplicable in a stabbing, had been systematically removed from the case file. Someone had orchestrated a cover-up, and Mercer had been their unwitting accomplice. He dialed a number known only to select law enforcement officials. "Carter, it's Mercer. I need you to pull phone records for anyone near Harmon's penthouse the night of the murder. Focus on burner phones and known associates of Nathaniel Frost." "Frost? The hitman?" Carter sounded alarmed. "Mercer, what the hell are you digging into?" "Just do it. We may have put the wrong man to throw." As he ended the call, his personal phone rang an unknown number. "Detective Mercer," a distorted voice greeted him. "I understand you're revisiting the Reynolds case. Some friendly advice. Let sleeping dogs lie." The call ended before Mercer could respond, leaving him frozen in his kitchen. The threat was unmistakable, confirming his worst fears. Powerful people were invested in Mark's execution proceeding on schedule. Mercer grabbed his service weapon and badge, newly energized by the danger. 5 years ago, he'd been blinded by ambition, eager to close a high-profile case that would advance his career. He'd ignored inconsistencies, dismissed alternative theories, and delivered the convenient suspect the department wanted. He wouldn't fail twice. He couldn't bring Michael back, but perhaps he could save Mark Reynolds. Racing to his car, Mercer called Warden Cassidy directly. "This is Detective Gabriel Mercer. I need you to delay Reynolds' execution. There's significant new evidence suggesting his innocence." "Detective, I can't just—" "Then at least let me see him." "Immediately." As Mercer navigated through the snowstorm toward Pinewood Correctional Facility, the irony wasn't lost on him. For 5 years, he'd been certain of Mark's guilt. Now, with execution hours away, he was equally certain of his innocence. The question was, had his awakening come too late? Just as Mercer raced through the mounting snowstorm, inside Pinewood Correctional's sterile walls, Mark Reynolds was being led to his final holding cell. Each step echoed with grim finality, a countdown to an ending he never deserved. The small room smelled of industrial disinfectant and despair, a scent Mark had grown accustomed to over 5 long years, but which now carried the weight of eternity. A female guard named Peterson removed his handcuffs through the door slot, the momentary relief overshadowed by what was to come. 2 hours, she said softly, something like regret flickering across her features. Mark sat motionless on the narrow steel bunk, mind drifting to Shadow and Rebecca. Had the warden called them? Would they make it through the unexpected storm? Or would his final wish remain unfulfilled, like so many others these past 5 years? The door suddenly swung open with a metallic groan. Warden Cassidy entered first, her expression unreadable. Behind hair a vision that made Mark's heart stop stood Rebecca, clutching Shadow's leash with white knuckles. For one eternal heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then Shadow let out a sound that was half bark, half howl, a cry of recognition, so primal it shattered the institutional silence. The German shepherd lunged forward with such force that Rebecca nearly lost her grip on the leash. Mark fell to his knees as Shadow reached him, burying his face in the dog's thick fur. 5 years dissolved in an instant. Shadow's sympathy and familiar triggered a flood of memories. Morning runs through mountain trails, evenings by the fireplace, the constant companionship of a being who loved without judgment or condition. "Hey, buddy." Mark whispered, voice breaking. I missed you so much. Shadow whimpered, frantically licking Mark's face, tail whipping back and forth with such intensity it seemed the dog might take flight. Blue eyes still bright despite the gray now frosting his muzzle gazed at Mark with unmistakable joy and recognition. Rebecca remained by the door, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. The sight of Herthaner now, with dark circles under her eyes and premature worry lines etching her once smooth forehead hit Mark like a physical blow. She had sacrificed her youth, fighting his battles. Rebecca, he managed the name a prayer on his lips. Warden Cassidy cleared her throat. You have 15 minutes, she said, then added with unexpected gentleness, I'll be outside. As the door closed, Mark noticed a guard watching through the observation window, a man named Rollins, whose eyes darted nervously away when Mark looked up. Something about his anxious demeanor struck Mark as odd. Shadow suddenly tensed, a low growl rumbling in his chest as he stared at Rollins through the glass. Mark had never seen this behavior from his normally friendly dog. What is it, boy? Mark murmured, stroking Shadow's back. Rebecca finally approached, kneeling beside them. He's been doing that since we arrived, growling at specific guards. It's so unlike him. Shadow pressed closer to Mark, still watchful of the window. As Mark ran his fingers through the dog's fur, he felt something unusual, a stiff, synthetic fiber caught in Shadow's thick coat. He pulled it out, examining the strange blue thread that seemed vaguely familiar. And then it hit him a flash of memory from the night of Harmon's murder. He'd seen this exact material, a distinctive royal blue fiber, caught on a bush outside apartment complex. The night someone had broken into his truck and stolen his hunting knife. The same knife later found in Harmon's chest, with Mark's fingerprints still on it. Mark's pulse quickened as he looked from the fiber to Shadow to Rebecca. For the first time in 5 years, the pieces were beginning to align. Was it possible that the key to his salvation had been hiding in his dog's fur all along? If you believe in the power of unlikely heroes and second chances, hit that like button and subscribe to see what happens next in this incredible journey. Will this tiny fiber be the thread that unravels a deadly conspiracy? Comment below with your theories on who really killed Victor Harmon. The moment Mark held that mysterious blue fiber between his trembling fingers, Detective Mercer burst through the administrative entrance of Pinewood Correctional Facility, snow melting off his coat onto the polished floor. His sudden arrival startled the front desk officer, who nearly dropped his coffee. I need to see Warden Cassidy immediately, Mercer demanded, flashing his badge. It's about Reynolds. Meanwhile, in the final holding cell, Mark was frantically explaining his realization to Rebecca. This fiber I saw it the night my knife was stolen, 2 weeks before Harmon was killed. Someone wearing something made of this material broke into my truck. Rebecca's eyes widened as she grasped the significance. If we can prove the knife was stolen and link this fiber to whoever took it, we might have enough for reasonable doubt, Mark finished, a dangerous flicker of hope igniting in his chest. Hope was a luxury he couldn't afford, not with less than 2 hours remaining before his scheduled execution. Shadow remained unusually alert, his attention fixed on the observation window where guard Rollins continued his nervous surveillance. The German shepherd's hackles rose whenever the man came into view. He's never acted this way before, Rebecca whispered, studying Shadow's behavior. It's like he recognizes something or someone. Mark's pulse quickened. Shadow was with me the night my truck was broken into. He barked like crazy, but by the time I got outside, whoever did it was gone. Their hushed conversation was interrupted when the cell door swung open, revealing Warden Cassidy with a stern expression. Time's up, she announced. Miss Foster needs to leave with the dog now. Wait, Mark pleaded, clutching the blue fiber. This could be evidence of my innocence. It's from the night my knife was stolen, the same knife used to kill Harmon. Cassidy's skepticism was evident, but before she could respond, a commotion erupted in the corridor. Detective Mercer appeared, breathing heavily, his authoritative voice carrying through the doorway. Warden, I need you to postpone this execution, Mercer insisted, showing her documents from an official folder. We found evidence suggesting Reynolds was framed. The holding cell suddenly became the eye of a storm, with Mark and Shadow at its center. Cassidy examined Mercer's documents with growing concern, her professional composure cracking slightly. This second forensic report, she murmured. Why wasn't it included in the trial evidence? That's what I've been trying to determine, Mercer replied grimly. And there's more. We've identified phone records placing a known hitman, Nathaniel Frost, within half a mile of Harmon's penthouse at the time of the murder. Rebecca gasped, instinctively moving closer to Mark. Shadow pressed against their legs, creating a protective triangle. Frost is connected to Harmon's security company, Mercer continued, lowering his voice, a company with ties reaching all the way to the governor's office. Mark felt the world tilt beneath him. For 5 years, he'd proclaimed his innocence, but even he hadn't understood the magnitude of the forces aligned against him. Is that enough for a stay? Rebecca asked, her voice quavering with desperate hope. Cassidy hesitated, clearly weighing her legal obligations against the disturbing evidence before her. I need to make some calls, but officially, the execution proceeds as scheduled until I receive contrary orders. As she stepped out with Mercer to contact the governor's office, Mark knelt beside Shadow, running his fingers through the German Shepherd's fur. You knew, didn't you, boy? You recognized something about Rollins. Shadow's blue eyes met his, holding secrets Mark could only begin to guess. Rebecca suddenly grabbed Mark's arm. Wait, Rollins. Didn't you tell me once that Harmon's head of security was named Rollins? The realization struck like lightning. Different first name, Mark whispered, but same build, same walk. Outside the cell, the institutional clock ticked relentlessly toward 11 a.m. execution time. In the administrative wing, Mercer and Cassidy huddled around a speakerphone, presenting their evidence to increasingly senior officials. The storm outside had intensified, cutting power to parts of the facility, emergency generators humming to life. And through it all, Shadow remained vigilant, his gaze never leaving the observation window where guard Rollins had mysteriously disappeared from Vieillois, if the mention of his name had sent him running. The pieces were finally coming together, but the most critical question remained. Would the truth emerge in time to save Mark's life? While guard Rollins vanished from the observation window, a flurry of activity erupted throughout Pinewood Correctional Facility. Emergency lights cast an eerie glow across the administrative wing as the storm-induced power outage affected more sections of the prison. Against this backdrop of chaos, the hands of justice began to move with sudden, unexpected speed. Warden Cassidy's phone call to the governor's office had triggered an immediate conference call with Judge Harrison Sanderson, known for his uncompromising ethical standards. The judge, already troubled by recent rumors of corruption in Harmon's business empire, ordered an emergency hearing to review the new evidence. Bring Reynolds to courtroom 3 immediately, Judge Sanderson commanded over the crackling phone line. I want everyone involved in this case present in 30 minutes. Mark could scarcely process the whirlwind of events as guards escorted him from the final holding cell. One moment he'd been saying what he thought were final goodbyes to Shadow and Rebecca. The next, he was being led not to the execution chamber but toward the small courtroom used for prison hearings. Shadow, remarkably, had been permitted to accompany them under Rebecca's supervision decision. Warden Cassidy justified as maintaining chain of custody for the fiber evidence found in the dog's fur. The courtroom, hastily assembled under emergency power, hummed with tension. Assistant District Attorney James Phillips stood near the prosecution table, his normally confident demeanor replaced by visible discomfort. Detective Mercer positioned himself near Mark and Rebecca, clutching a folder of documents like a shield. Several prison officials lined the back wall, whispering urgently among themselves. Most surprisingly, a slight man with wire-rimmed glasses sat at the defense table. Ellis Tanner, he introduced himself to Mark with a firm handshake. I've been your appeals attorney for the past 3 years. Mark blinked in confusion. I never met you. No, Tanner agreed, a hint of steel beneath his mild appearance. The state denied all my requests to see you, but I never stopped working your case. Before Mark could respond, the bailiff called out, All rise for the Honorable Judge Harrison Sanderson. The judge entered, his weathered face grave as he surveyed the assembled group. No formal robes, just a rumpled suit indicating he'd rushed to the facility unprecedented for a death row case. Let's be clear, Sanderson began, his voice cutting through the tension. We are here because substantial new evidence has emerged, suggesting a miscarriage of justice in the case of Marcus Reynolds. This is highly irregular, but so is executing an innocent man. His gaze swept the room. I understand we have multiple discoveries that converged almost simultaneously. Detective Mercer, begin. Mercer stepped forward, his testimony precise and damning. The suppressed forensic report showed footprints at the murder scene that couldn't match Mark's shoe size. Phone records placed known hitman Nathaniel Frost near Harmon's penthouse during the estimated time of death. Financial transactions between Harmon's security company and shell corporations traced back to Frost's known aliases. As these revelations unfolded, Mark felt strangely detached, as if watching someone else's life story. 5 years of fighting the system had left him numb to hope. Shadow pressed against his leg, a warm anchor to reality. Your Honor, Mercer concluded, I believe Reynolds was deliberately framed for Harmon's murder to protect powerful interests connected to the victim's business dealings. Phillips rose to speak, his voice strained. While the state maintains, the courtroom door burst open, cutting him off. A woman in a press badge entered, followed by a court clerk carrying a sealed envelope. Your Honor, the clerk announced breathlessly, reporter Julia Chen has evidence directly relevant to these proceedings. Judge Sanderson, visibly irritated by the interruption, nonetheless motioned the reporter forward. I'm an investigative journalist, Chen explained. I've been tracking Victor Harmon's illegal activities for 6 years. Yesterday, I received this anonymous package containing security footage from Harmon's penthouse the night of his murder. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Sanderson called for order, then directed a court technician to play the footage on the room's small monitor. The grainy video showed a man entering Harmon's penthouse through a service entrance. Though his face remained mostly hidden, his gait and build were unmistakable too. Mark, it was the same distinctive walk as guard Rollins. That's him, Mark whispered to Rebecca. Beside them, Shadow's hackles rose, a low growl emanating from his throat as he stared at the screen. As the footage continued, the intruder confronted Harmon in his study. Though there was no audio, the heated exchange was evident. Then, with practiced efficiency, the intruder produced a knife-marked stolen hunting knife and stabbed Harmon multiple times. A collective gasp filled the courtroom. The killer's face briefly turned toward the camera as he left, and despite the poor quality, there was no mistaking the identity. That's Thomas Rollins, Mercer declared, standing abruptly. But he goes by Derek Rollins here at the prison. He's been guarding Reynolds for years. Phillips slumped in his chair, the color draining from his face. Judge Sanderson leaned forward, his expression thunderous. Where is this guard now? He demanded. Warden Cassidy stepped forward. He disappeared during the power outage, Your Honor. We have security searching the facility. This is beyond a frame job, Tanner interjected. They put the actual killer in position to guard the man he framed, probably to ensure Reynolds would be executed before the truth emerged. An officer burst through the door. Warden, we found Rollins attempting to flee through the service entrance. He had these on him. The officer held up a plastic evidence bag containing a passport, cash, and a burner phone. Judge Sanderson had heard enough. With grim determination, he declared, I am officially staying the execution of Marcus Reynolds and vacating his conviction, effective immediately, Mr. Reynolds, on behalf of the Montana justice system, I offer our profound apologies for this unconscionable miscarriage of justice. The words seemed to echo in the suddenly silent courtroom. Mark felt Rebecca's hand grip his, her tears falling freely. Shadow pressed his muzzle into Mark's palm, as if understanding the monumental shift that had just occurred. The restraints, Judge Sanderson continued, gesturing to Mark's handcuffs. Remove them. A guard stepped forward, unlocking the cuffs that had bound Mark for 5 years. The metal fell away with a symbolic clink against the wooden table. There will be a full investigation into the corruption surrounding this case, the judge promised. But right now, Mr. Reynolds, you are a free man. Free. The word hung in the air, too enormous for Mark to grasp. His wrists felt strangely light without the familiar weight of shackles. His mind struggled to process the rapid succession of events from death row to exoneration in less than an hour. Rebecca embraced him, her body shaking with emotion. It's over, Mark. It's finally over. But through his own overwhelming relief, Mark noticed Detective Mercer exchanging concerned glances with Ellis Tanner. This conspiracy reached beyond a single corrupt guard, extending into the highest levels of Montana's power structure. The people who orchestrated his framing wouldn't simply accept defeat. Mark was free, but he understood with sudden clarity that his journey was far from over. As reporters began flooding into the courtroom and officials scrambled to process his release papers, he knelt beside Shadow, finding calm in the dog's steady blue gaze. "We did it, boy," he whispered, stroking the German shepherd's graying muzzle. "You never gave up on me." Shadow licked his face once, a gesture of pure love that transcended the human world of corruption and justice. In that simple act, Mark found something he'd lost 5 years ago, the certainty that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would face them with unwavering loyalty by his side. The cameras flashed relentlessly as Mark Reynolds stepped through the main gates of Pinewood Correctional Facility, a free man for the first time in 5 years. The moment should have felt triumphant, but instead, a wave of disorientation washed over him. The world beyond these walls had become a foreign country while he'd been preparing to die. Rebecca stood beside him, her hand firmly clasped in his. Shadow pressed against his leg, a living anchor in this sea of unfamiliarity. News crews shouted questions from behind hastily erected barriers, their voices blending into an incomprehensible roar. "We won't be making any statements today," Ellis Tanner announced, shielding Mark from the media frenzy. "My client needs time to process his ordeal and reunite with his family." Family. The word echoed hollowly in Mark's mind. His parents had died before his arrest, and he had no siblings. Rebecca and Shadow were all the family he had left, the only ones who had never doubted him. The following days passed in a blur of contradictions. Mark found himself startling at ordinary sounds, a car backfiring, a door slamming that his mind transformed into prison lockdowns or guard warnings. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by nightmares where he was back in his cell, the execution proceeding despite his proven innocence. "It's called post-incarceration syndrome," Dr. Levine explained during Mark's first therapy session, arranged by Ellis Tanner through a nonprofit for exonerees. "Your brain and body are still adapting to freedom. The hypervigilance, anxiety, even the discomfort with making choices, these are all normal responses." Normal. Nothing felt normal anymore. Even staying in Rebecca's guest room, surrounded by her familiar presence, couldn't completely dispel the feeling of displacement. Mark found himself standing in supermarket aisles, overwhelmed by the endless variety of cereal brands. He'd stare at restaurant menus, paralyzed by options after years of prison food that offered no choice at all. Only Shadow seemed to understand, staying close during Mark's darkest moments. When panic attacks struck in the middle of the night, the German shepherd would press his warm body against Mark's, grounding him in the present until the walls stopped closing in. 3 weeks after his release, the Montana Attorney General's office formally announced they wouldn't retry the case. The same day, Mark received notification of a preliminary settlement offer for wrongful imprisonment, $1.8 million for 5 years of his life. "It's a starting point," Ellis explained as they sat in Rebecca's living room, documents spread across the coffee table. "We can push for more, especially with the evidence of deliberate frame-up." Mark stared at the figure on the paper. "Money doesn't give me back those years." "No," Ellis agreed quietly. "But it can help build your future." Future. Another concept that felt distant, almost theoretical. Mark had spent so long fighting to prove his past innocence that he'd stopped imagining what might come after. That evening, he found Rebecca on the back porch, watching Shadow explore the small fenced yard. When she turned, Mark noticed she'd been crying. "What's wrong?" he asked, settling beside her on the weathered steps. "Nothing," she said, wiping her eyes. "Everything. I kept your case files in my car trunk for 5 years, afraid to put them away because it felt like giving up. Now they're gone, and I don't know what comes next for us." The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken hopes and fears. Before his arrest, they'd been planning a wedding, a home, a shared life. Now they were different people, shaped by trauma and separation. "I don't know either," Mark admitted, taking her hand, "but I want to find out. With you." 3 months later, Mark stood on the banks of Pine River at sunrise, the exact time he had been scheduled to die. The water flowed clear and cold, reflecting golden light that broke through the trees. Shadow ran ahead, freed from his leash to explore the shoreline, his aging body still energetic in these wide-open spaces. Rebecca approached from the parking area, carrying coffee in disposable cups. "The realtor called," she said, handing him a steaming cup. "The offer on the Riverside property was accepted. We can start building whenever you're ready. Mark nodded, a sense of peace settling over him. With his settlement money, he'd established the Second Chance Foundation, dedicated to helping exonerees rebuild their lives and advocating for reforms to prevent wrongful convictions. Their first initiative, a partnership with trained service dogs for former inmates suffering from PTSD, already garnered national attention. The investigation into the conspiracy surrounding Harmon's empire continued to expand, implicating judges, police officials, and even a state senator. Detective Mercer had become a key witness, his testimony dismantling the corrupt system piece by piece. Guard Rollins, the actual killer, had accepted a plea deal, revealing names and details that ensured no one involved would escape justice. "I had a dream last night," Mark said softly, watching shadows splash through the shallows. "For the first time since getting out, it wasn't about prison. I dreamed about building our house, about waking up to this view every morning." Rebecca leaned into him, her presence a comfort he'd once thought forever lost. "That's not a dream anymore. That's our future." Shadow returned to them, shaking river water from his coat in a joyful spray that made them both laugh. In the dog's blue eyes, Mark saw the same unwavering loyalty that had saved his life, the pure, uncomplicated love that had recognized his innocence when the entire justice system had failed. The German Shepherd bounded ahead once more, leading the way forward along the riverbank. Mark and Rebecca followed, hand in hand, stepping into a future built not on the foundation of what they'd lost, but on the strength they'd found in fighting for truth against impossible odds. Their journey had taught them the fragility of justice, the resilience of love, and perhaps most importantly, that sometimes the greatest heroes come with four paws and a heart that recognizes innocence when all human systems fail. In Shadow's steadfast devotion, they had discovered the most profound lesson of all, that in a world where institutions can falter and fail, the unwavering faith of one loyal companion can make all the difference between death and redemption. Some say justice is blind, but in Mark's case, it took a dog's unwavering vision to reveal the truth that everyone else had missed. When I first learned about Mark Reynolds' story, I was struck not just by the horrific injustice of his wrongful conviction, but by the extraordinary power of connection that ultimately saved him. What began as a condemned man's final wish became a masterclass in loyalty, persistence, and the quiet heroism that often goes unnoticed in our world. Shadow didn't just recognize his owner after 5 long years, she recognized the truth when an entire justice system failed. The lesson here goes beyond a heartwarming reunion or even a dramatic last-minute salvation. It speaks to something deeper about our humanity, that sometimes our most reliable compass isn't found in courtrooms or legal briefs, but in the simple, unshakable bond between a man and his faithful companion. Mark's journey reminds us that justice, while imperfect, can still prevail. But it also shows us that healing after trauma doesn't happen overnight. Each small step from Shadow's comfort during panic attacks to the riverside property, where Mark finally dreamed of the future instead of the past, represents the painstaking work of rebuilding a life that was nearly extinguished. The Second Chance Foundation now helps hundreds of exonerees find their way back to a world that continued without them, proving that even our darkest experiences can become a light for others. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful stories of resilience and redemption. Drop a comment letting us know what moved you most about Mark and Shadow's journey. Was it Rebecca's unwavering faith, Detective Mercer's courage to admit his mistake, or Shadow's intuitive understanding that ultimately saved the day? Remember, sometimes the most profound truth-tellers have 4 paws and a heart that sees what human eyes cannot. Until next time, keep believing in second chances.